Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, friends, well-wishers of wherever you are. You're welcome to the 7th ALP Global Townhall meeting on the AfCFTA and issues surrounding the implementation of the Africa Trade Agreement, easily the largest trade area agreement in the world. And it's Africa trade is getting hotter. It's the theme of today. This is our 7th town hall. I'm happy to say that you always haven't had me as your moderator, but my co-moderator today has led this before. Patricia Mutoso is a trade lawyer. She's the director of partnerships at ALP Trade Africa, ALP Trade Africa. Patricia, say hello.
Hi, everybody who's tuning in for the 7th Town Hall. You're most welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, and everybody in particular, yeah, because we've got over 350 registered participants, and I'm sure they'll be joining. I can see them climbing gradually, steadily. We've got participants from 30 countries and 5 continents, so it's truly a global town hall, and we're very pleased and excited. This is our 7th, like I said, and it's our town halls are designed to bring the private sector and the public sector together, particularly in the policy initiatives as AfCFTA rolls out, and particularly to give the private sector a voice within which they can participate. And hopefully, if they shout loud enough in the corridors of power, the doors will open and their voices will be heard. And we're happy to have a good mix of both private sector and public sector participants here today. Patricia will be introducing them in due course, but my business is to say that today's theme is tuned towards the GTI and how it's going to be. The Guided Trade Initiative, as you all know, is that matchmaking process where we can stimulate the growth of the activation of all the protocols under the AfCFTA. And hopefully there's so much excitement now because hopefully the number of participants under the GTI likely to grow, as I hear, to as high as 29. And that will show real stimulation. And the anticipation is that it will affect many of the global supply chains that we are aware of today, and long may it last. So my business right now is to introduce our guest speaker. Patricia will be introducing the rest of the panelists. Our guest speaker for today, who's going to give us an overview, is our friend and colleague, Professor Jonathan Aremu. He's part of the Nigerian Association of Chambers of Commerce and Industry in Mines and Agriculture, and he chairs the AfCFTA trade group. That's only just one of his incarnations. He has several. He's a professor of economics in Covenant University, and he's a well-known commentator on trade and African law issues. Prof, are you with me?
Thank you. Happy to meet you.
Yes, good to see you.
Good morning to everyone. I've been actually been introduced, and though the topic is GTI, Guided Trade Initiative of African Continental Free Trade Area, but we need to know some conceptual issues so that we'll be able to really understand this thing very well. Looking at the magnitude of people that are joining this particular program, it's an opportunity to be able to go into the basics of what is the issue of economic integration. Compelling evidences around the world today have proved the beneficial opportunities available in economic integration. And that is why virtually near all countries of the world participate in one economic integration or the other. Therefore, when you look at the global economy of today, the concept of multilateral regionalism is what is been obtainable. What is multilateral regionalism? It's a situation in which all of us agree to be a member of the WTO, but at the same time retaining our different groupings. And Article 24 of the GATT allowed for this kind of a thing. So Africa also, we discovered that we shouldn't be left out in this, that we need to be able to integrate ourselves so that we can trade with ourselves better. Why? Because substantial trade among the other regional groupings of the world, particularly in compliance to their global environment, in relation to the world, among themselves. More of the European trading company, 60% of their trading is between among themselves. Southeast Asian company, 30-something%. NAFTA, 40%. But when you come to Africa, 12% to 16% among ourselves. So this cannot continue. And that is why we discover that what are we going to benefit if we do this? Most of our trade leadership is not actually among ourselves. And that is why a lot of our leaders have said in the past that rather than continue trading with the entire global economy, developed countries, and trading less with ourselves, shall we not create an opportunity to have economic integration among ourselves? And then two presidents make some comment, which you are going to see in one of the slides, which are made available here. They'll be giving them to you. And that is why both Pan Nkrumah as well as other leaders have actually argued for creation of not only African Union, but later on in 1991, African Economic Community Treaty, which is the equally titled Abuja Treaty, in which there shall be a movement from having our free trade areas among ourselves into coming together at a later stage under a continental approach. And the real concept of economic integration is a situation in which when countries go into regional grouping among themselves, they will reduce the price among themselves, which is permitted by Article 24 of WTO, but they will maintain the import duty against the third party, which is other countries of the world. And with this, they'll be able to actually trade among themselves by diversion of trade from other parts of the world. Both the creation of more trade among themselves and diversion from the other part of the economy has substantial beneficial effects. Some other people argue, which I actually agree, that equally has some negative effect in terms of when you measure it with respect to the loss of revenue. And I agree substantially with this. I've actually talked to the African Task Conference in Tanzania last year with respect to the revenue loss arising from economic integration. But at the same time, when the trade creation is more than the trade diversion, when the import duty that be lost is more than the import, the trade creation that created be more than the revenue loss, then economic integration is very important. And that is why countries that are going to economic integration must ensure that they have tradables, they have opportunity to be able to ensure that they can produce what can be traded among themselves. And that is why it's so important that in Africa, we need to be able to build the infrastructure that will allow trading opportunities among ourselves. So it's so important that if there are infrastructure that determine trade, not only light, other things like road, other things like contractual relationship, like intermodal and multimodal transportation system that will guarantee movement of goods among countries, all these things have to be put in place. And that is why the issue of trading in goods and trading in services becomes complementary to themselves. While you are looking at trading in goods, you have to look at the transportation service as well. And luckily, we have some people that are highly knowledgeable. Beatrice is there, who is working on trading services. And also we have somebody who's on investment. Because you cannot trade without investing. And that's why the investment protocol of African Continental is equally complementary to increasing trade among ourselves. So you look at all what we are doing, that all the 6 protocols that have been entered into at African Continental Free Trade level, they are complementary to themselves, and they are very important. After putting all this one in place, the Secretariat thought that it's very important to be able to have countries to guide them how to be able to trade. But let me say this before I go into that. That hitherto we have been trading with quite a lot of transnational corporations, and my paper will be circulated to you. Trading with all these countries has led to substantial negative effect in terms of things like transfer pricing, trade misinvoicing, as well as other things. Under Tabo and Bakery report of 2015, it was recorded that $65 billion leave Africa annually as a result of illicit financial flow. And 70% of this amount is a result of transfer pricing, mispricing, and over invoicing and under invoicing of trade with respect to import and export respectively. So, but among ourselves, when we come together, we can see the development of African and transnational corporations that will be trading among ourselves in terms of vertical integration in different countries, in which companies in Nigeria, we have branches, we have subsidiaries, we have associates in different parts of Africa. So also for country from South Africa and country from Ghana as well, so that this will minimize this issue of transfer pricing and trade misinvoicing as well. So those are some of the benefits, but at the same time, what have to be put in place. And that is why I think that after Secretary thought it very important that we have to put a program in place, which is a guided trade initiative, that will actually show what have to be put in place first to allow this thing to take off. Because a lot of people are saying, what do we do to take this thing off? And the main reason for these things have been put in place by after Continental Area Secretariat. And the guided trade initiative is a test opportunity to test run how far the things that are put in place will be able to assist. And then 2022, 8 countries were actually test run, and the success of it is allowing about 29 countries, of which Nigeria is not going to be part of it, to equally be put on board in terms of a granted trade initiative. And the beauty about this second one is that it's going to involve trade in services. But let me say this, which is where the work lies, and I'm sure Patrick and Beatrice is hearing me very well. Substantial things have to be done with respect to trade in services. Over the year, we have learned how to trade in goods with respect to import and import duties. But how much of the mode of trade in services have been understood? How much of mutual recognition agreement have been done among the professionals to permit the movement of all these services across borders? And this is where a substantial activity lies. I don't know to the extent which my people in Nigeria are putting in place, but this second lab is going to involve trade in services. So, and that is one of the main reasons why we are here today, to look at countries that have gone into it, to look at how we can put trade in services into it. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you, Prof. And you literally answered the question I was going to put to you about how confident you were about the trade in services part of this next round of GTI participants. Well, I mean, I'd like to see what are you pessimistic, or what your attitude?
I'm very, very much optimistic. I was privileged to be able to work for UNECA by putting in place the national strategy for Nigeria with respect to the African Continental Free Trade Area. And what we need to do other than trade services have actually been put in that particular strategy. But what we still need to do, which I cannot deny, is that the sensitization has to be there. Everywhere we go, people are not totally sure of how services can move across borders. The different, lawyers and all this have been talking to me, and I feel that we need to be able to make this talking more intensive across Africa. Yeah. Because the trading services, mode 1, that means services can cross border without any of the contracting partners moving. Mode 2, right? Somebody can go and consume the services like tourism. Mode 3 is the investment aspect of it. And I'm happy that the head of investment section of AfCFTA Secretary is here. So it's going to happen. So you cannot run away from trading services and investment. Yeah. And then mode 4 is the temporary movement. So I discovered in my university, I've been telling them we should be able to participate in mode 1, mode 2, mode 3, mode 4. But we have to mutual recognition agreement, as well as our national commitment under the trading services. We have to know all of them, which is a lot of work.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm very, very optimistic.
Yeah, well, I'm happy that because I'm optimistic. And I think the services will vary in different degrees as to how they are amenable to cross-border travel. It's not what will be good for law might not be good for, say, the insurance business and what have you. So,
well, let me say one thing.
Yes.
At the Nigeria Economic Summit Group in October last year, President Tinubu told us, of which I'm aware of, in Nigeria, the GDP of the country is 53.7% of trading services.
Yes. Yes.
Which means there are comparative advantages in trading services.
Yes. Yes.
Which means it's a great opportunity.
And we share a profile. We share a
Okay.
profile like that with several European countries, and I'm
Okay.
so happy that
Okay.
we have a European trade expert on the panel today. And talking about the panel today, let me quickly segue into that. I must say to the audience, there is a poll going on, and you will see it pop up in the Q&A section. Please participate in the poll. We can see the Q&As filling very quickly, and we hope that the section just after the speakers we'll be able to take a couple of questions from the audience, because this is an interactive and it is a town hall. It's interactive and it is a town hall. And generally, well, not generally, as a mandatory outcome, we take the views that are expressed at town halls and we share them with the AfCFTA Secretariat in the hope that we can have some role in shaping policies. At ALP Practice Group, we have, for the last over 7-10 years, been involved in pushing African trade and particularly being a resource to AfCFTA initiatives. And we're a great champion, and we will be far into the future. Now I'll hand over to Patricia, who will take on the role of introducing the next section, the speaker panel list, as well as putting questions forward. Patricia, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Shaswari. That was wonderful, Professor. I think you have said what there is to say about the town hall, but be as it may, we must continue with the session and find out what the other experts have to say. So welcome to everybody. Welcome to all those who have joined us today, and welcome to the panelists. So the first panelist is going to be Beatrice Chator. She's an international trade lawyer. She was called to the bar in England and Wales, as well as Sierra Leone. She has over 30 years of experience in providing advice to NGOs, governments, and intergovernment organizations on trade and investment. She's currently the head of division trading services in the Directorate of Trading Services at the African Continental Free Trade Area. She has previously served as a director of policy in the Ministry of Trade and Industry in Sierra Leone, and has been a program director for the Foundation of International Environment Law and Development in London. She has undertaken assignments for the European Union Commission and the UN Food FAO. Beatrice is interested in research and analysis on economic policy affecting Africa. She has private sector interest in fintech, agribusiness, textiles and garments, and creative industries. Welcome, Beatrice. The second panelist is Dave Anderson, who's a partner at Bryan Cave Layton, which is based in Brussels. He's qualified to practice in the US, Belgium, and the UK. He's an expert in international competition and regulatory law for over 25 years. He advises clients globally on several areas: technology, energy, transportation, chemicals, and consumer goods sector. He has advised the UN Conference on Trade and Development on various issues with regard to competition law. He's also a professor, and he's recognized by his clients as one of the leading lawyers in competition. Welcome, Dave. The third panelist is Patience Okala, who's an expert investment advisor with the Secretariat and advised as Director Legal Services of Nigerian Investment Promotion, where she was a lead negotiator of Nigeria's interministerial team in negotiating bilateral investment treaties. She has participated as Nigeria's lead negotiator in bilateral investment treaties between Nigeria and several other countries. In her current role, she's undertaken a study of all investment treaties, law, policies, and regulations of the 54 African countries, and she is most welcome to today's session. The fourth panelist is Olusegun Olutayo, who's an international trade policy and trade law expert at the National Action Committee Secretariat in Nigeria. He has deep knowledge in trade and development, negotiations, data management, trade facilitation, and regional integration. He has over 30 years experience in that. He holds various titles, which I'm not going to be able to elaborate on today, but the most important one, and why we have him here today, is because he is the senior trade expert and lead trade enablement at the Presidential National Action Committee in Nigeria. Welcome, sir. The last one is Umar Oda. Forgive my Kenyan accent. Adelodan, who's a seasoned African entrepreneur with a diverse skill set in minerals, infrastructure, real estate, and agriculture. He's a co-founder and VP of a tech firm. And he's also the vice chairman of West Africa Automobile Limited. You're most welcome, sir. So the first question is going to be to Beatrice, and it's going to be with regard to trade services. Welcome, Beatrice.
Thank you.
So the services industry is very lucrative around the world, and AfCFTA holds the trading services as a key component. So the question is, in what ways can the AfCFTA create consumer value on the continent, especially after the shocks of the global supply chain like COVID? Please answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patricia. And it's my pleasure to be on this panel with long-term friends as well as new friends. So thank you for the invitation. I believe the AfCFTA creates value by establishing the conditions to bring down trade transaction costs, to develop regional value chains, and to drive industrialization in Africa. I mean, the agreement is specifically designed to boost intra-Africa trade and to enable the African private sector to easily transact business across the continent. Under the Trade and Services Protocol, which I deal with, African countries have committed to liberalize services progressively. That means domestic services markets are to be opened for service suppliers from other African countries through, on the one hand, schedules of specific commitments where the depth and the scope of market opening is set out. And then on the other hand, regulatory frameworks for cooperating on specific sectors on the other hand. And this is being done at the moment for 5 priority sectors, and they include business, communication, financial, tourism, and transport services. And these are the subjects of the first round of liberalization. And right now, we have 22 adopted schedules of specific commitments from countries in Central, East, and Southern Africa in these 5 priority sectors, service sectors. And this, to me, represents the outline of the single African services market, with more to come. And that means that in these service sectors, restrictions are being reduced to enable services to be traded across borders, either through establishment of branches, so mode 3, or supplying the service through the internet, mode 1, or through the movement of persons to deliver such services to the consumer, mode 4. Now, when all these restrictions are removed, that then helps African business to move into these markets and supply their services. And this eases the pressure on supply chains on the continent. And these 22 countries of Central, East, and Southern Africa are now eligible to participate in the AfCFTA Guided Trade Initiative on services, and therefore to begin trading within the single market without waiting for others to be ready. That's the whole idea of the Guided Trade Initiative. It says to countries, start trading. You've got the legal wherewithal to trade. You've got the legal instruments in place. Just go ahead and start trading without waiting. So in this way, trade under the protocol can get started sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Beatrice. I hand over to Mr. Shasore for the next question.
I want to particularly welcome Dave Anderson of BCLP, Brian Cave, Leighton and Payton, who is a European trade expert. We've got a lot to learn. In the back room, I must say, when we were talking between ourselves, panelists, the European trade area is 60 years old and they're coming close to perfection. And we're hoping we don't have to wait 60 years. And we're hoping to learn from people like David to ensure that doesn't happen. Now, the European Union is probably, it is the most advanced single market in the world, without a doubt. And you've done extensive work in the area, Dave, particularly in the area of competition law. We're at crossroads as to how we're going to run competition law across Africa. And, you know, there's a debate as to whether there will be a uniform law, or we will deal with conflicts in different national laws as it comes about, or we should have an AfCFTA code, but AfCFTA code. But what sort of structure do you think is best suited for the enforcement of competition protocol within the AfCFTA? And what reasons would you give to support that? Dave?
Sure, thanks. And thanks so much for the invitation, all my friends at ALP. And it's great to be here with everybody. As I was discussing with Beatrice beforehand, I've been really fortunate and honored to help the AfCFTA Secretariat and some of their work. And I just find it fascinating. I have to really applaud the work that all of you are doing to make this single market come to fruition. You're trying to do a new law, a new procedure, new regimes, as you said, trying to get over some of these conflicts to create the single market. It's ambitious, it's brave, it's needed. But as my mom always used to say, there's magic in boldness, and what you are doing is extremely bold and inspiring. I'm from the US originally, but I've been based here in Europe for 30 years. So I've seen two of these big markets functioning over my career. And I can say that the establishment of the European single market has really benefited this continent. To some extent, as far as you guys are looking forward, I've seen the future and it works. In the EU, for example, we have increased interstate trade 510% in the last 30 years since we started the real single market project in 1993, which is when I arrived here in Brussels. 3.4 trillion euros of interstate trade here in Europe alone. So I do think that the system works once you do it. But to create a single market out of many sovereign nations, you need to do exactly what I think you're doing in the free trade area in your phases 1 and 2. Exactly as Beatrice was saying, starting your trade in goods through the GTI and then eventually and then services. In the EU, we have this as well. We have our 4 freedoms. We have movement of goods, services, capital, and workers, and also establishment. And now you're going on to phase 2, which includes the competition protocol, which I was really pleased to be able to help advise on through the UN and also through your secretariat. But the key to success, I think, for the single market, or I would say one of the really important keys is competition law. And that's being discussed right now through the protocol that was agreed last year. But I would say the EU would not have gotten to where it is today, as you said, as you know, I think one of the more successful single markets of so many nations, not nearly as big as what you're trying to do, but still a pretty big one, is having the 2 clear policy goals that happen through competition law to help support and buttress the free market that you're trying to create. One is to protect the competitive process, creating efficiency, innovation, lower prices, increased choice, enhance consumer welfare, and make the market better for business to be able to expand and do what they do best, which is to find demand and to meet supply. That's what business can do when it's freed of the shackles of really unjustified or really artificial trade barriers that you're trying to get down. And competition law can help to do that. It can do that really, we did it here in the EU through the creation of the single market, creating our supply chain, because competition law helps to make sure the borders are open and they're free, and that businesses are playing by the rules, which says that should be open and that should not be subject to cartels or monopolization or undue restrictions. So they can expand their supply chains freely and do what they do best, which is go out there and serve the customer. The EU founders said, in the beginning, you can't have an integrated single market without a central competition authority. And that's what I think what you're looking at to do in the free trade area. You do it through anti-cartel provisions, merger control, and abuse of dominance, and those are all really important. But in your competition protocol, you've said the exact same thing, which I think is really inspiring. You've said the African single market has to be underpinned by trade liberalization, market efficiency, inclusive growth, which you need to enhance competition. So the two go hand in hand. And I really think that here in Europe, that has worked to the benefit. So we could talk a little bit more about specifics in the later part, but I really think having those two policies, which is exactly what you're doing, will enhance the ability to create and forge your GTI as your first steps and your single market later.
It's like a hybrid. You're suggesting a hybrid. There will be there could be a central authority, and a code will then emerge as to the basic principles for anti-competition practices.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think is the debate right now, which is how strong is that central authority and how much are the member states willing to do. The EU provides a good model for that because we've done it. I wouldn't say it's perfect. I wouldn't say it's flawless, but I would say that power sharing exists. And that's a good way to get to a political compromise without compromising the importance of creating your single market. I can talk more about it later too, but there is that how strong is your central authority going to be and how much power do they have versus the national authorities and the REC authorities as well.
Great, and we stand to gain a lot from learning from the experience of the European model and from people like you, Dave. And I'm sure there will be a lot of to and fro as we go forward. Well, thank you for that, and we'll come back to you. I'm going to hand over to my colleague in ALP East Africa team, Patricia.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Shosore. Yeah, I'm glad that this has been handed over to me. So Patience, you have a lot of experience when it comes to bilateral investment agreements. Yeah, Africa needs investments. You have a lot of experience when it comes to negotiating bilateral investment agreements. Yeah. So right now, what you're saying, the investment will rapidly grow because we are going to have elimination of Africa's financial borders. Yeah. So where do you see the future of bilateral investment agreements? Yeah, Kenya has been hit hard because of our bilateral investment agreements. Yeah, so let's hear your take. What is the place of bilateral investment agreements when it comes to the African Continental Free Trade Area? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia, and thank you, ALP, for organizing this forum. I am particularly excited any chance I get to talk about the new investment framework across Africa because of the prospects that it presents for Africa. In relation specifically to bilateral investment treaties across the continent, you find under UNCTAD's database that there have been 900 BITs between African countries and other treaty partners. From this number, we have 180 intra-African BITs that are in force. These are BITs within African countries. To answer that question, Patricia, it would be important for us to step back and find out these BITs. I mean, how did they come about? What are they supposed to do? Historically, these BITs were more of instruments that were used by the investors to ensure that their investments in developing countries, in specific terms, Africa, were more or less protected. It was funny because the preponderance of what you have as provisions of those BITs were protection provisions. There were provisions around fair and equitable treatment, national treatment, investor-state dispute settlement. Even though the BITs themselves were titled, in some cases, investment promotion and protection agreements, they were essentially protection agreements. But there has been a global shift. There is reform that is ongoing. Right now, globally, on Citral Working Group 3, there's a reform around ISDS provisions. And then even in the ICSID Working Group as well, there have been ICSID processes have also been reformed. So in order to meet the development aspirations under the AfCFTA protocol, it is important to realize that we must shift, we must move from just having a protection agreement to an agreement that does not only meet the profit expectations of investors, but also the development aspirations of the continent. And globally, in the shift that is going on, you find out that the core elements of investment promotion are now being provided in the BITs. You have rights to regulate. You are trying to expand the investment facilitation dimension of our bilateral investment treaties. So a similar work has already gone on under WTO with the Investment Facilitation for Development Agreement as well. And historically, those treaties where there was an asymmetry. It was more for the protection of investors, like I had said, not for the development of the regions. So there has been efforts being made to balance that asymmetry and also to see how we can refine the dispute resolution provisions, how we can add safeguards, and then try and make dispute prevention more prominent. And as I begin to highlight a number of these things, there are things that the AfCFTA Protocol on Investment have now put on the table. There are global shifts that have been made, but in terms of a continental perspective, there's a new landscape for investment regulation under the AfCFTA Protocol on Investment. All the elements I have mentioned to you that are reform-oriented are now embedded in that protocol. But before then, the BITs across the continent were largely lacking. And like you said when you were reading our bios, we had undertaken a study of all the bilateral investment treaties across the continent. So there was no mention of sustainable development, for example. There was nothing about rights to regulate. There were very minimal references to circumscribed national treatment or most favored nation. In fact, you will hardly hear about investment facilitation or even investment promotion, for that matter, in the core of the bilateral investment treaties. We hardly had safeguards for transfer of funds. We had almost unrestricted and unlimited access to investor-state dispute settlement. But with the AfCFTA Protocol on Investment now, BITs have a hope. And you ask me how? Because this document, all state parties to the agreement are supposed to align their bilateral investment treaty framework with this agreement. In particular, it replaces all the intra-African BITs. Then the investment laws, investment policies are supposed to be aligned, including that of the RECs, with this investment protocol. So the protocol brings a new hope on the horizon to enable us meet the aspirations of the AfCFTA agreement.
Thank you, Patience. We'll get back. I hand over to my co-moderator, Mr. Shasore. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I mean, I was getting goosebumps just listening to Patience, and thank you very much for that. That's fantastic. And I'm going to apply to the powers that be to allow myself and Patricia to be a permanent duo in this co-moderation, because I think we do it so well. But it's a good point to bring in Olusegun Olutayo, who Patricia had introduced earlier on as a senior trade expert. Now, Segun, are you there? Let's talk about Nigeria. With the frequent problems that have been identified with the standard of goods intended for export under the GTI, particularly this phase 2 that we're all optimistic that Nigeria will participate in and other countries, and as Professor Aramu said earlier on, will grow to 29. In what ways can the private sector contribute to mitigating the problems that you foresee?
Foremost, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. And first and foremost, I want to also toe the line and register that I'm also delighted to be on this global platform of ALP. Thank you for the invite. Now, straight to address some of these issues. First and foremost, I think we need to begin to have a clarity of understanding when it comes to AfCFTA. And these are things some of us have been pushing and taking our stand, regardless of any other opinion, because that is the way to go. First is to recognize that the success of AfCFTA comes to that critical word implementation. I love that word. Until we begin to embrace the entirety of this word, implementation, because that is what actually put food on the table of our people. How do you industrialize? It is in the implementation. How do you move your people from one point to another? It is implementation. How do you increase? Regardless, I remember many years ago when I was doing one of my master's thesis, the same document I read, the same percentage that they are quoting us at that time is still the same thing. They would tell us the intra-African trade is still less than 20%. How do we now ensure this happens? Straight to the question, in terms of standard, in terms of engaging the private sector. we have to have this holistic understanding that AfCFTA, regional trade, is about private sector. Until we begin to have that clarity, and every thought, every step, every design, every framework is actually roving around the private sector. For us at the National Action Committee, we have that understanding under the leadership of my principal, Mr. Olusegun Awolowo, that it is about private sector. And how do we ensure regarding the issue of standard? First, we are engaging the private sector of Nigeria on very frequent basis. I tell you, 2 weeks ago, we are engaging Manufacturer Association of Nigeria. And we let them know that you need to begin to have a clear understanding. AfCFTA is not trading from my country, Lagos, to Kano. No, it's an international trade. And if you want to go into international trade, there are standards that you need to meet. It's not a question of, I am from here, this is my color. No, international trade requires you must meet that standard. Until you meet that standard, you are here to prepare to trade under the international trade and, of course, the AfCFTA, bringing it down home and preparing for the second phase. With Nigeria, let me put it in that context, we are actively working to join the second phase of the GTI. And the private sector that we are engaging, we are constantly letting them know that you have to be ready to meet the standard of the importing country. Yes, GTI allows a kind of a handshake, whereas you can begin to trigger the advanced ruling under the trade facilitation, ensuring that you communicate to the counterpart, ensuring that the customer are in the know of what is going to come or what is going to happen. But then it is to emphasize that you need to meet the standard required in terms of packaging, in terms of every element around this. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Segun. And my regards to everybody on the National Action Committee, because you guys are doing a fantastic job. Please keep it up. And what we couldn't win in the Cup finals, we'll win in AfCFTA. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Patricia now. Enough about football. Patricia, are you there? Take me away from football.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is for Umar. Umar is an entrepreneur. So what I'd like to know is, what is your vision for precious metals and the agriculture industries under the AfCFTA, and how do they align with the protocols of the agreement? Yeah, so you can answer this question in any way. You're free. Don't feel restricted. Let's hear what you have to say about this. Let's hear what you have to say about precious metals and agriculture industries. There's a lot of conversation about commodity exchanges in Africa, commodity exchanges in the whole of Africa. Let's hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I think I would like to say a big congratulations to the organizers of this program. It's quite a laudable one and is accurately timed. Now, talking about my vision for the agri and metal space, I think before even going there, we need to look at the current situation of things, especially when we're looking at the metal space, where the conversation globally right now is essentially around the energy transition. Now, according to Bloomberg, for the world to achieve energy transition by 2050, $10 trillion worth of metals have to be traded, and a block of that will have to be coming from Africa, right? So our strength in Africa right now lies in the fact that we have abundance of raw materials. However, our weakness being we have limited industries available to process them. So my vision for Africa in terms of commodities cutting across the metal and the agri space is one of collaboration between the countries. And regional collaboration. So what we're seeing is a situation where if we're not careful, while we're trying to trade some of these commodities, we're going to be losing a lot of value by trading it as it is in terms of raw material. So what I think needs to happen right now is regional collaboration in terms of forming industries that would be with the mandate will be based off of value addition. And with that, I think we can get value for our raw materials, which we seem to have abundance of. That's one. Number two, like you said, there's a lot of conversations around exchange platforms. I think it would be really critical for us to have a unified exchange platform, especially as regards metals and agri-produce. Because what we're seeing is, like I said, a sizable number of the commodities will be coming from Africa, right? So what we really need to do is to create a unified exchange platform, which will give us the value for the abundance of raw material, that we have. At OET, one of the things we're currently doing is to create a marketplace where the suppliers can essentially meet, and not just in Nigeria alone. The startup is running out of Nigeria, but we are trying to create a regional collaboration marketplace where different players can come together and be able to, trade essentially. And for me, I think my vision aligns with the protocols of the AfCFTA. Because essentially what this leads to is essentially, reduction in tariff and free movement of goods and services, as the AfCFTA is essentially trying to do. I was at the IETF 2023 in Egypt, and seeing the amount of work that the After Group and the Afro Bank is essentially trying to do to promote intra-African free trade through the trade finances and a couple of other investments, promotion that they're trying to do. I think a lot of this, if we're able to bring it all together by leveraging the abundance of commodities that we have, that's domiciled in Africa at large, and being able to create a regional collaboration, like I said, I think that would be the ultimate vision. And because why I say that is because this vision is beyond just economic prosperity, is one that will lead to social cohesion and environmental sustainability. Because, like I said, while Africa, as we all know, Africa is one of those we are the ones playing the least in terms of addition to the effect of climate change, but we happen to be the ones feeling it the most. So looking at the metal space and looking at how critical and how metal intensive the energy transition would be, and being at the front and center because of the abundance of these raw materials that we have, and using that to form a block, leveraging the historical agreement, which is the AfCFTA. I think that would be my ultimate vision for Africa and the African Free Trade Agreement.
Thank you, Omar. That's a good response to the question. I'm just wondering if Mr. Shasari will be taking the next question.
I would have been happy to take Beatrice, but I see it's an East African question. So why don't you do it? That way I get there. Go ahead.
I'm happy to tackle this. Thank you. So Beatrice, the question is regard to trade services again. Yeah. Yeah. So the 21st century is all about the digital economy, isn't it? Yeah. But the general outlook is that services are going to be a great place to be trading. Yeah. That's profits to be in. So the question here is, what is your advice for the state parties who want to have a very vibrant service-driven economy? Yeah, let's hear. And maybe would give us a heads up on the proposal that is there, just like Professor said in the service on software development and technology. Yeah, let's hear.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, I think it's very important for all AfCFTA states to be aware of the vital role that services plays in the economy. I mean, the service sector drives economic transformation. So if you look at things like communications, logistics, construction, energy, financing, all of these are transformative. They're what we call like the backbone services to the economy. Then you also look at areas like tourism, transport, healthcare, education. These provide vital jobs in tourism. And when you take all of this together, in effect, all of these are the whole picture of an enabling business environment for any economy. So on the one hand, they need to understand the role that services plays in the economy. They need to understand how these sectors can provide jobs, can enable other businesses to work seamlessly and work efficiently and be more productive. They also need to be aware that, for instance, on the business services, which is part of the negotiations now, this is part of the liberalisation agenda, the first liberalisation agenda, professional services such as engineering, accountancy, architecture, legal, medical, these are vital components of modern economic progress too, and they also enable a conducive business environment. It's very important that such professionals have mobility under the AfCFTA. And in a sense, it kind of speaks to the fact that these service sectors will involve development of human resources. Most of the service sector is about developing talent, ensuring that that talent can innovate as much as possible, whether it's through technology, digital means, just inventiveness. So they require a different type of strategy than, for instance, just let's say mining or even manufacturing is getting more and more digital and therefore more and more knowledge intensive, which again comes back to this issue of human resources. So I would make policymakers aware that the service industries enhance the performance of downstream economic activities, and they are essential for promoting growth, reducing poverty. Services complement manufacturing, as I mentioned. They're critical enablers, not just for value-added production, but also for the development of the regional and continental value chains that we're intending should be developed in the case of the AfCFTA. So really unlocking intra-Africa trade in services can lead directly to an increase in Africa's GDP and the economy and enhancing levels of employment, skills transfer across the continent. I think it's important to underscore this. You cannot have commercially meaningful trade in Africa without trade in services. You look at financial, you look at ICT, you look at transport, you look at professional services. All of these sectors are vital to that whole liberalization agenda. And therefore, any African country wishing to grow economically and socially should focus on reducing restrictions and barriers to trade and services. That would then drive investment into these service sectors. It would ensure that there's a multiplier effect across the economy and across business systems. It would allow the development of these regional value chains that we want. It would initiate industrialization on a scale that can transform society. So take, for instance, the development, and you don't even have to take some sophisticated, knowledge-intensive, sophisticated, technologically advanced sector. But just say you take the development of the creative industries, such as film, TV, music, which Nigeria already is showing such comparative advantage in. These industries depend on the movement of professionals across the continent, but they also depend on easing of distribution rights, that's services, easing financial systems, that is services, connected transport systems, that is services, mature and reliable internet systems, that is services, buoyant tourism products in order to support the entire creative industries ecosystem. That, in a nutshell, is already a key component. Even if one country just focuses just on tourism alone, the tentacles that would go into all the other areas, even agribusiness, you would need to feed restaurants, hotels, etc. All of this shows the vital importance that services can play in the economy. So what should African countries do at the very beginning? They should finalize their schedules of specific commitments in the 5 priority services, because already these 5 priority services, as I mentioned, already can provide the outline of the single services market. They should then focus on the development of regulatory frameworks that would help to remove limitations and restrictions on market access, reduce red tape, reduce bureaucracy for issues such as licensing, permits, access to markets, because a lot of the time you have the market opening. Then when you get into market, there are so many obstacles because of all the restrictions, the regulatory hurdles that are present. But they should also use the opportunity of the market opening to drive, or essentially to develop their services policy and have real services policy reform. So, for instance, where there are no services policies nationally, they should develop those policies based on the market opening and the liberalization agenda. And then where the services policies are weak, they need to upgrade those services. I think the other component is that in order to do all of this, you need fairly advanced and well-structured public sector institutions to support such services policies, because that would be critical for implementation and monitoring. Olusegun mentioned implementation, and that is really the bugbear of many African countries. I would say getting into treaties and being part of regional arrangements. It's always that's where the rub is. It's always at implementation and then monitoring, review, making appropriate policies, adjusting policies, etc. So it's really important for these public sector institutions to be developed and sustained. And that includes, for instance, research institutions that support policy making or that support private sector in product development, research and development, innovation, etc. It's at the same time, the other thing that Olusegun mentioned is this issue of the private sector. The last piece of advice I would give to any government wanting to have a services-driven economy is constantly have dialogue with your private sector. This should be a continuous process so that negotiators and regulators are maintaining channels of communication with their chambers of commerce or other business support organizations, so that really the needs of the private sector are being addressed both in the liberalization agenda and in policy making, and that the private sector is really aware of the opportunities in the services market. Most of the private sector in Africa right now is SMEs. And how are we going to assist those SMEs to understand those regulatory frameworks in the different countries? How are we going to get them to understand what it takes to get a license, what it takes to kind of establish a branch, all these kinds of things? It's really important for the private sector institutions to be supported and maintained. And there has to be, let me just say, governments, especially when, like, for instance, it's technology, they tend to either underestimate the amount of support that SMEs need, or they overestimate, the revenues that are coming to the private sector, and then they maybe tax or they provide too many burdens on the private sector. It's really important for us to take maybe a leaf from Asia, in Korea, Japan, most of Southeast Asia, where SMEs are nurtured and developed to be champions of industry. That is such a critical balancing act that needs to take place. So reduction of taxes, reduction of red tape and bureaucracy is critical. But that dialogue and that partnership between the public sector and the private sector, I would say, is absolutely central to unlocking the opportunities that the AfCFTA has for the private sector in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice. That's a very good answer. A handshake between the private sector and the public sector. And let's not say that the 5 priority sectors are traditional. Let's work on them and stop critiquing. Thank you. Hand over this to Mr. Shasore. Thank you.
Yeah, and I loved a lot of what Beatrice said, and just to re-emphasize it, she talked about unlocking the service sector can lead to a great increase in Africa's GDP, and I thought that was an immense contribution. But most importantly, dialoguing with the private sector. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah,
Yeah,
I can hear you.
dialoguing with the private sector, and this is
Yeah.
one of the thrusts that we have
Yeah.
in our town hall series, dialoguing with the private sector. And to hear Beatrice from the Secretariat say that, it just shows you that we all are aware that the partnership and implementation of the AfCFTA agreement is that combination of private sector and policymakers coming together. Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Don't forget the polls running. Please participate in the polls. I've got the next speaker is Dave Anderson. He's going to take a question. Actually, the theme of today is Africa trade getting hotter. Now, Dave and I are in Europe. It's not hot in Europe, but Africa is getting hotter. Dave, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here for sure.
So sticking to the script, because I tend to now in the competition practice, we've seen that there's typically a line drawn between businesses who I wouldn't say innocently, businesses who expand into other jurisdictions by just force of their activities. The money people, the insurance people, they do it. The IMTOs, they do that instinctively, and the dominant market player, particularly in the money people, whether it's credit cards or what have you, or money completion transactions. What do you anticipate would be a problem, given your experience in the EU, for the AfCFTA in the competition area as it relates to market domination?
Yeah, so I mean, this is an area that is global, right? All competition agencies around the world, whether they're continental or regional. Actually, the only regional authorities in the world are there with you in Africa, so you're quite unique in that way. And then the member states are all grappling with this. However, it is an area where we really are able to regulate it in a way that is converging globally, which is great. And I think that the drafters of the protocol, and I commented on an early version of it, really pick this up, which is to pick up the best international practice with regard to how you regulate dominant companies or monopolies or companies which are, and I would say the main infringement globally is not holding those positions. And remember, if you believe in capitalism, you want companies to strive towards dominance. That's what we want. We want them out there knocking themselves out to provide better products and better services and more innovation, so they can win. There's a famous quote from a U.S. Supreme Court case that says, government should not turn on the business that wins, because that's what we want. But what they can't do is then, once they get to that position, to abuse it, to harm the market, to create foreclosure. And that is exactly what is baked into your competition protocol, which is following international best practices in this area. And so that's really super important. Sometimes dominant companies also tend to be involved in cartels because they have strong positions already, and it's easier to then cooperate illegally with your competitors. So cartel enforcement is super important, and merger control as well, to help kind of be the crystal ball gazers. That is really important to see what's happening in the future of a business sector. Will this merger tend to monopoly, or will it create a dominant position? That is often the test, and that's what you're going to use where you are as well. The key that I think, though, is to make sure that, and I think it goes along with what Beatrice was saying before, which is the member states, and this is a great private-public sector collaboration, is to engage in advocacy, to make sure that awareness of competition law is at a high level. I will tell you right now, globally, that is not the case. We've done many surveys and studies over the years that show that even in mature, advanced economies with relatively sophisticated companies, even their level of awareness isn't where it should be. Therefore, you don't have compliance, which then hurts your economy. because you then have damaging behavior, for allocative efficiencies and companies which are basically not playing by the rules, and so the economy is suffering. So public authorities, and that could be your free trade zone central authority, it could be the REC authorities and the member states, all really need to work hard at helping to collaborate and educate private sector, SMEs in particular, about competition law. And that's not only so they can comply, which is super important because we want compliance, because that helps to drive the economy when everybody's playing by the same rules and the machine's humming along, but also, especially for SMEs, where they know when to raise their hand. They know, hey, something in the market isn't right. That strong company is actually flexing its muscles in a way that may be illegal, or they're collaborating in a way that may be illegal. And companies often don't know when to do that to their local authorities, to the competition authorities, or to your future trade area central authority. And so I think that is really important. And that's a great bridge that we have. Competition authorities around the world do this. They invest a lot of money in advocacy because it's a prevention versus cure savings. If you can prevent the infringements that hurt the economy and competition law, then you're protecting your market. You're keeping it open. You're making sure companies can still trade cross borders freely. There's no private sector restrictions there. So I think that that is a great place for advocacy to happen. I know it sounds old school just to tell people, and it's up to companies too. They need to bear the burden themselves, but they do need help from competition authorities, especially in a new market that you're trying to create, to make sure that there's enough education out there to drive compliance. And I know that that is a really important goal that we've talked about, along with compliance, Beatrice, for getting all the member states to adopt and to ratify the protocol as well. So I think hopefully those things, if that is a priority goal, along with all the other advocacy you're doing, that would be great. And that would be international best practice as well.
You know, it's so interesting that you should say that, because as we speak, there's so many M&As going on across Africa, particularly in the financial sector services. And yeah, you know, there isn't any czar, there isn't any monitoring authority. And I can say, hand on my heart, I don't think we've got a monopolistic entity yet. But I hear you saying lovely advocacy which could lead to prevention of the dominant player. And we could have that compliance with a code that then emerges. But the finance sector, you will agree, is probably ahead of everybody. Don't you think so?
Yeah. And I really think that that is an area where, a lot of this work can be done, and where we have it, but where by the creating your single market and creating more incentives for companies to get involved and creating new platforms, new technologies, new innovations, that's what a cross-border competition regime can help to protect and foster in Africa, just like it's done in other places. And just on your last point about the czar, it's my dream for you guys that you get a competition authority at the central level through the Secretariat that has enough power and enough standing so that Africa gets to sit at the table of these big international deals, the big international investigations, which right now does not happen because the other folks don't know who to call because it's too fragmented. And so if you get that,
we need a focal point. Yeah.
If you get that, then Africa gets to sit along with the US, gets to sit along with EU and some of the other big players like China, who represent important big jurisdictions, and you are then part of the conversation to help create the fix, or to make sure that whatever's happening, the African interests are there. So I really think that your strong authority coming through the Free Trade Area Secretariat is super important. That's what I'm advocating for you guys.
Thank you very much. It's this point that I then hand over to the lovely Patricia. And you're going to talk to patients. Patricia, over to you.
Thank you. That was interesting. I liked the argument about the crystal ball gazer. So we are going to have to ask patience to be one of those, or what we call prophets in Africa. So patience, the question here is, what sectors of member state economies do you think will benefit from investment? That's with state parties. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Patricia. So I'm taking my first dip as the crystal ball gazer, but that in itself is a bit problematic. It is indicative of one of the problems we have on the continent. So if you sit as a policy institution, you would have difficulty determining what is it in terms of preference for sectors for the private sector. So it is important, like Beatrice had said, like Dave had also mentioned, it is important to engage with the private sector. So I can just hazard a few guesses, but it is important for us to make sure that we keep conversations going. I know one of the things that AfCFTA is doing from an investment perspective is we have started in the past 1 year having more and more policy dialogues with the investor, with all stakeholders in the investment community, so that it can lead to policy advocacy of what needs to change, especially as we get even deeper into implementing the policies that we're formulating. So from my own estimation, what sectors? The easy answer would say all, because Africa is a very rich and very attractive bride right now. There are many sectors of interest, and of course it differs from country to country. What countries will decide will be the sectors in which they are interested in. The point will be for me that Africa should not squander it with minimum value transactions. We should ensure that we get value add from those sectors. But I would like to answer it from 3 different headings. First, the traditional sectors. There are some sectors that are responses to stark realities that we have found ourselves. And there are some sectors that I like to call the new kids on the block. You know, sectors that we have seen that investors themselves seem to have an appetite, a growing, increasing appetite for. So the traditional sectors, your guess is as good as mine: agriculture, agro-processing, agribusiness. So it's dealing the entire value chain, not just production, the entire agricultural value chain. And the second sector under those traditional sectors will be the extractive industry, the minings, oil and gas, those same, the elephants in the room, they are still being courted. I think the challenge for us now will be to ensure that we have the capacity to add value and process these things on the continent, so that the continent is not just a source of raw materials going outside, creating jobs elsewhere, and then we import them. So that is the challenge for those sectors, but they are still very attractive. The second set of sectors I would like to just mention would be the sectors that are responses to the realities of our times. The first of which will be, COVID-19. The challenges around COVID-19 made us realize, opened our eyes to the need for us to actually close the gaps in the pharmaceutical production sector. So that is a sector that I believe that will be a low-hanging fruit for the AfCFTA, because there's interest both from the policy and from the private sector side and from the demand side for the pharmaceutical sector. And also sectors like the infrastructure sector. There are many countries in Africa that are deficient in those areas. They would like to, those are some of the quick wins as well. And then a sector like the power sector. I can't help but push this in. If you followed the banter during the AFCON match that ended 2 days ago, a particular country was being poked for being in darkness. So it's a blessing. It sounds like a curse, but it's a blessing because it's an investment opportunity. So that automatically places that in the fore. And then just to round up, I would like to talk about what I call the new kids on the block, the forward-looking sectors. And I'm talking about sectors like digital trade, like fintechs, like banking. Those are sectors for which investors themselves, not just policymakers, have shown an appetite. And of course, we're curating policies along that direction. There are efforts being made right now, speaking to the Secretariat, to tidy up a protocol on digital trade. And then there are also sectors like automobile industry, transport, logistics, all of that too will be sectors that I think, by my own estimation and by our peripheral interactions with the private sector, will be sectors that a member state could benefit from. But I'd like to just add a bit, because these sectors are potentials, right? It is important for us in adding value to help the member states. Member states may need to prioritize their ability, their capacity to profile the projects in these sectors to attract qualitative investment. That is a discussion for another time, but it is something that we need to do. And from an investment perspective, I will have time to talk about it maybe later on in the webinar, but there are institutional innovations that have come into the investment protocol to help us ensure that this goes beyond just lip service, but that the implementation is as seamless as the policy making somewhat was. Thank you, Patricia.
Oh, that's a good response. Quite weighty, value add, ensure the investors who come in, are doing the great thing. Yeah. Use the traditional sectors, but don't forget that they're emerging areas. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had goosebumps when Patience was speaking, and she talked about football. I wasn't happy about that, but because we lost. But she talked about digital trade, and Patricia, Kenya wasn't there, so don't look so smug. But she did talk about qualitative investment, and I think that's it's not just about crossing borders for the sake of it. It's about bringing value with your investment. So fantastic. Are you handing over to me?
Yes, we have. I don't know. We have some.
Olusegun, I have Segun. So Segun, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Fantastic. You're going to talk about, I want you to see where the National Action Committee is engaged with the private sector. Now, if you look at the history of the EU, and the EU is a great model for us. Well, great model because it has been the most sustained model. There were specialists within the respective fields engaged by their government for the negotiations and policy formulations. And that gave life to that whole trade area. To what extent do you think the National Action Committee is engaged with the private sector? Because this is one of our thrusts in our town halls, and this is our 7th, and we intend to keep going until we make sure that public policy formulation in the AfCFTA includes private sector engagement. So tell us, how far do you think the National Action Committee of Nigeria has engaged with the private sector?
Thank you very much, SCN, for having me back as well. It has been a very engaging. So, it's interesting for me. I leap forward when I had the very first round to speak, and I try to make it clear that it is the private sector, and I'm so happy. My sister British, she took the baton in that line, and of course Dave also followed suit. If we are going to have a success of this beautiful trade, it has to be within the context. It's like we're just wasting time, and like I like to say, maybe we just close the shop. The second thing, which I think is a suggestion, where there's going to be a communique after this brilliant webinar, I think this should form part of it, the private sector side. And then the second one, which of course, again, my sister Beatrice also, took the baton by trying to echo it. It is coming down to the implementation strategy. So now, bringing it home again with the National Action Committee, situating it with your question, SAN, it is to begin to see how we begin to develop what I call adaptation strategies and policies. They will always have this literature to say infrastructure, this and that, then it behold of whoever is in the driver's seat to ensure these things are done, which National Action Committee is doing adaptation strategy. Even when we have the understanding that we are working more or less with a bare hand, we tell ourselves under the leadership of my principal, we need to adapt. And how do we adapt? The very first thing we used to do is we always say that we must have strategy within strategy. So engaging Nigerian private sector, we launch what we call consultation. Consultation with the stakeholder, meaning we are not taking that step without you having your voice on whatever we need to do. Perhaps we receive a note verbal from the secretariat. Perhaps there is something that the agreement is not clear about. We engage them and say, Mr. Manufacturer Association, come. Mr. Nasima, come. Mr. Neka, come. This is the issue. This is what we are about to do. What is your view? What is the members are saying? Do we go ahead and have a meeting? Do we have a dialogue? So when you have all these garments together, you are not taking that step, but the step they have also have their input inside it. Secondly, it is also come to the issue of the partnership. For National Action Committee, we are trying as much as possible to ensure that we have the partnership. To the extent, the partnership is not even limited to even the private sector. Then the development partner comes in, because we have the understanding that their portfolio, on the basis of yearly program, there are some things inside it that has been said, no, you can go ahead and engage the implementation committee at the state level as relates to the AfCFTA implementation. I like using that word because the AfCFTA implementation allows you that latitude to maximally engage the private sector, and the National Action Committee, we are actively doing that. I'm announcing this. Next week, we are going to be having another round, which we call mobilization of businesses, onboarding them under the GTI AfCFTA. It is actually one of the checklists that we receive from the Secretariat that go and mobilize the private sector. We have done the first summit. The second one is about coming up in Lagos. We are looking at massive of even more than 200 businesses that are exportable, that are ready to trade under the GTI. So with all this, it is clear that within the mandate that was given to the National Action Committee by the presidency, it is to ensure that you coordinate the entire MDAs, the stakeholders, the civil society, and then the businesses. That mandate is what is driving the entire processes, the entire strategy, and much more, again, how National Action Committee has been engaging the private, mentioned the partnership, information sharing. Every single documentation that comes to the table of the National Action Committee, immediately we push it and ship it to the private sector to let them know this is what is happening. How do we ensure we will follow suit? Again, another thing that we're also engaging is the regulatory framework. Now, this comes vis-a-vis now another a kind of an handshake with our regulatory agencies, 3 of them critically, and then letting the private sector know that these are new development under the AfCFTA. You need to have this, you need to mean this. January 20, within the week of January 20 something, I was having a meeting as giving the directive by my principal with all the 3 regulatories in our country, the NAFDAC, the SON, and of course the NDQ, and letting them know that this is where the mandate that was given at the Act of Parliament that was given to this regulatory, then we are able to point it out to them that this is what you should do. Are you lacking the capacity? How do we come in? How do we assist? And they were so happy with that initiative. And essentially, it has been a very smooth engagement with the Nigerian private sector, particularly ensuring that AfCFTA implementation benefit Nigerians and Nigerians.
Really, thank you immensely for that, Shegun. And give my regards to Mr. Olo as well. Because you've said that the National Action Committee is about consultation. And this is what our town halls have been set up for, to provide that platform for consultation. You have your methods, but we think we've eminently elevated a platform for people to freely, voluntarily, without prompting, guide policy formulation through consultation. So thank you for that. I also thank you that you say that you provide a latitude to engage with the private sector, which is what we are about in ALP, in our town halls. So I really thank you for that. And your mission is to mobilize businesses. And we would like to see a situation where you involve ALP, and given our track record over 10 years and 7 town halls, we'd like to see where you engage us in doing that. And even in your area of information sharing, which you said, we'd like you to see this platform and the ALP Africa-wide global town halls as a process to information sharing for AfCFTA. Thank you very much for that. Thanks a lot, Shegun. Patricia, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Are you ready to take over?
Yes, indeed. It would be nice to have ALP involved in more of this, because we've been
champions for a while, haven't we? We've been champions for about 10 years.
Yes, we
Even
have.
when people were doubting.
That's true.
Yeah.
This question is for you, Umar. You must be smiling when you hear Mr. Olutayo speaking about latitude to engage with private sector, mobilizing business. Everybody is saying engage the private sector. You're here, you're representing the businesses. Kindly tell us what challenges you have encountered while doing business across Africa, and what you want the policy or everybody to know, and how that can be improved. Let's have the answer in 3 minutes. Running out of time.
Can you repeat the question real quick?
Yes, Umar, please tell us what challenges you've encountered in business. What do you want the policy holders to know?
Okay. And apologies for the noise you might be hearing. Unfortunately, my flight was moved up, so I had to rush down here to the airport. Now, talking about the challenges that we have faced in trading, cross-border trade, I think essentially one of the major challenges happens to be infrastructure, right? In Africa, essentially, and I don't know about global, but in Africa, a majority of the trade happening currently happen to go via, the road network. And unfortunately, our road network in Africa is not particularly great. And so infrastructure is a major challenge. That's number one. And number two is bureaucracy in the custom procedures, right? What we have seen is lack of clear and clear and direct custom procedures, which leads to a lot of delays and sometimes increase in the cost of moving these commodities from one country to another. So I think a really good thing that will happen is a situation where we can streamline the custom regulations, the custom procedures, and cut out the bureaucracy. Also, I think another thing is about lack of effective way of managing dispute resolutions, which I think is where the ALP champions would like to actually step in as well. As we are scaling up, we're gearing into the AfCFTA fully. I think creating an avenue and an effective way to actually manage dispute resolutions that will come up, not even will come up between the cross-border trade will be something interesting to really, really look into. So those are some of the challenges that we have faced, and looking at it, a lot of investment in the infrastructure. Currently in Nigeria, I happen to be a director for one of the port projects. I would hide the name for now. We just recently got our FEC approval. And one of the things we are trying to do with this port is to designate it as the first solid minerals port in the country. We think with this sort of approach as well, things can be able to just move a bit faster, because in developing countries, what we see is different ports handle different commodities. And that's something we're trying to do with the particular ports in question, where we can designate things as a solid minerals port, where everyone in the country knows that, if you're trying to move metals and, minerals out of the country to other African countries and even globally, this is the port to go to, as there will be a streamlined procedures to actually go about the standards checking and standard checking and monitoring of the commodities that's being moved as well. And in terms of creating the infrastructure required to actually check and harmonize the standards between the country that's been taken from and the country of destination. So those are some of my suggestions on the challenges that we have faced in our trades.
Thank you for your response, Omar. If you'd kindly make your final thoughts, all the speakers are now invited to make their final thoughts on the conversation today. Omar, if you could kindly make your remarks.
I think, firstly, I would like to thank the ALP, the AfCFTA for putting this platform together. I've really learned from all the speakers that have spoken. I mean, it's been quite an interesting conversation. I think these conversations are, like stated, this is the 7th edition. I think it being a bit more happening a bit more, and a lot of other private sectors being able to key into such conversations will be very, very important to drive the conversations around free trade. And essentially, I think another thing I would just like to sound is, just like Mr. Olusegun said, private sector will have a critical role to play in the implementation of the AfCFTA. A lot of people, a lot of businesses are looking towards the government to handle the problems, but honestly, that's not going to happen. It's left for the private sector, the private sector, to actually prefer solutions that can invariably even lead to other businesses that can actually drive the AfCFTA agreement that has been drafted. So I think that would be my last thing to say, is that for the private sector to actually just pull up the seat on the table and actually become a critical part of this conversation moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lutayo, if you could kindly give us your final remarks.
Thank you very much, Patricia. My closing remark will definitely center around one word. And then, of course, to say thank you for having me on this APL. I look forward for further engagement. And what is that one word? Implementation, 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 implementation. If these form our thoughts, if these form our daily thinking, strategy, I can guarantee Africa is on the path of greatness. I thank you.
Thank you. Implementation it is. Thank you. Patience, kindly give us your closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Patricia. I almost called you Patia because that was what my closing remarks was going to be around. I just wanted to throw out there that there is an institution that has been created under the Protocol of Agreement called the Pan-African Trade and Investment Agency. It has already been adopted, is yet to be operationalized. So the concerns around morphing from policy to action will be dealt by that institution. It will help with image building, investment promotion, investment facilitation, policy advocacy, and capacity building across the continent. So it is something that will give hope for us to transform the policy into actual action. And we're still working on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Patience. Dave, kindly give your closing remarks.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, just to say what an honor it is to be with all you guys on this panel. And I continue to be super inspired every time I interact with people either from the secretariat, from the directorates, from the private sector, from the law firms like ALP. We work so closely on this project. And it reminds me of when I came to Brussels in 1993, and we were in the early stages of the last stage of our single market how exciting it is to be part of this, but there's a heck of a lot of work to do, and I totally take that on board. But I think you guys will be faster than we are, as we discussed, hopefully standing on the shoulders of the EU model, which I think is probably the best one for you guys, better than the US, I would say, for many reasons. And it doesn't map perfectly, of course, but I think there's a lot of inspiration you can take to hopefully accelerate your growth. And as I always say to people when we're doing new things, you know, a line from a movie that I really love about baseball, sorry, not soccer. If you build it, they will come. If you build it, they will come. You build it, and business will take advantage. It will do everything once it's freed of the shackles of artificial borders and subsidies and regulation. And so please continue to do what you do. And for the Secretariat and for all the directorates, when we started here, our single market project, one of the things that kept telling people was explain and explain and explain what we're doing and why, because that will help for people to understand. That's the advocacy piece. So I really encourage you to continue to do exactly what you're doing now. So thanks again, everyone, for letting me be a part.
Thank you, Dave. Indeed, we like the EU pace. The American pace can sometimes be a bit too fast for us, but we keep learning. Thank you. Beatrice, let's hear from you.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure to be part of this panel. Thank you very, very much. I've learned a lot myself, and it's always a pleasure to be among such illustrious colleagues. You know, the AfCFTA has been called a game changer for Africa, and I firmly believe it. It's one of the most exciting initiatives that Africa has ever embarked on. And I think every man, woman, child, entrepreneur, whatever, public official should just be so excited about it. It is the most impactful thing, I believe, that Africa will ever do for itself. So for the private sector, I would urge every business person to read the AfCFTA agreement, read the protocols that actually you know, are concerned with your business, you know, trade in goods, trade in services, the dispute settlement process, know about it, and then, of course, the dispute settlement issues that are coming up under investment. Learn about what provisions would apply to your business, understand that agreement, and then, you know, engage with your public sector officials, engage with your trade officials. Make sure that you are putting the feet to the fire of the public officials, especially those that have said they want to be part of the Guided Trade Initiative. Olusegun talked about implementation. This is what the Guided Trade Initiative is all about. It's about saying, let's get started. We're not waiting for anybody else to be ready. We're going to get moving. We're going to start trading. So right now, all of those that already have the legal instruments in place to start trading, go ahead, start trading. Dialogue with your private sector, continue that conversation, and let's get moving. Let's transform Africa. We're all in this boat together. And I believe that what we have already established, as Dave mentioned, is already the foundation. Now let's just keep moving. Let's just keep working. And although the road is long, the steps that we've already started taking will take us there, will take us to the ultimate goal, which is transformation of our economies, transformation of our societies. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice. Together we can do this. We remain optimistic. And yes, the GTI is a step towards the right direction. Thank you. Do I hand this over to my co-moderator, Mr. Shatwari?
Yeah, I mean, I'll take it gladly. I mean, I love what Beatrice said there, particularly, you know, the issue of a Pan-African Trade Investment Agency and the opportunity that presents for both public and private sector to collaborate within an entity outside the sector. And we would love, as an Africa-wide advisory system called ALP, we'd love to be part of that. And I'm sure this conversation will continue in the back streets. Patricia, I know you will follow that up. And she also said the dispute settlement system is something that we should all engage in. That is one of the biggest problems, you know. the dispute settlement structure that we see is state to state, and we'd like to see it to do state to party as well, so that it resembles a proper investor-state conflict or dispute management system. But thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have somebody with authority from the Secretariat. So, Patricia, we've got to the point where we're going to have a Q&A. Even though we've got final statements from the speakers, we've got some curated questions. We're going to take a limited number, maybe 3 or 4, or 4 or 5. Can you see any there in the Q&A? All parts of the audience, please remember, participate in the poll. All your contributions are going to be put together into a white paper that will be sent to the Secretary. We've sent 6 already. This will be the 7th. We are consistently champions of the AfCFTA, and we're champions of bringing private sector voice into public sector policy formulation. Patricia, what do you say?
Yeah, indeed.
So let's see what questions you have. What do you got in the question box there?
Okay.
We're getting close to the end of our time, and we need to wrap it up. So let's see what we've got. Have you got anything? Yep.
I have a few. I'll take this up. Yeah. So the first question that we have is from an anonymous attendee who does not want to be known, but his question is present. Okay. I see the professor's hand is up. Yes, Professor.
Professor Jonathan.
Thank you very much. Mine is not a question, but just to say, after listening to our wonderful speakers, I think that I just need to say these few sentences. Number one, that it has been proved from these discussions that investment is necessary for trade. Before you can trade, you have to invest in what you want to produce. And that is why the wisdom of the AfCFTA is the fact that investment protocol has to come on board. But more importantly, particularly what we are doing in ECOWAS, is that there may be need for capital market integration. During our development of Pan-African Investment Code, which was the fulcrum for the development of investment protocol of Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we stepped down the issue of the capital market integration so that the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the Cairo Stock Exchange, the Morocco Stock Exchange, and what we are developing in the ECOWAS, they can come together. They have been meeting. But this right now to be able to make sure we recognize this. And I'm sure Beatrice is here. And this is one of the steps that have to be taken at the Secretariat to make sure that that aspect of financial sector development is actually supported by the Secretariat. That is very important. So that capital can move across borders. And other things can move because for continental transnational corporation that we actually take the position of the former transnational corporation, there is need for harmonization of capital across our member states. Secondly, on the issue of Shegun, which he said about the issue of engagement, the issue of a consultation and dialogue, I will say that those are good development, but it has to move to engagement. Engagement is more than consultation, and it's more than dialogue. Engagement means that in the development of policy, you have opportunity to make contribution. So as much as possible, and that was some of the things that were, I will say, were lacking, because by the time we were finishing the various protocol in African Continental Free Trade Area, I was part and parcel of those people that were working in Nigeria. Somebody talked from Tunisia and even came to Nigeria when we have a conference in Transcorp. He said in our country that they say, yes, we have signed, but we did not do anything. So engagement is very important. So I think from now on, the issue of engagement is extremely crucial. Lastly, which I want to say is this: infrastructure. Before God in his almighty can create anything, he said, let there be light. In many countries that want to participate in African Continental Free Trade Area, the cost of energy is too high. Can you produce in darkness? If you can, that means you are wiser than God, because God said, let there be light before you can produce anything. So I think that we need to go back into our different countries, particularly in Nigeria, and make sure that the infrastructure, not only light, but other things that came up from this discussion are issue of the transportation, which is very important, intermodal and multimodal transportation system. And I'm talking to my sister, Beatrice, a lot of things lie on your head, making sure that the movement across border is simplified in terms of the contract of movement, so that a good that is coming from one remote area in Kenya can actually move from different mode of transportation to a remote area in Katsina State through different mode of transportation. It's a huge job, but I know it can be done. Thank you for the opportunity granted me.
Patricia, do you have any questions from the floor?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Professor. I'm sorry we had kind of forgotten you, but yeah, we saved the best for the last, yeah? So the question here is from an anonymous attendee who's touching on a very important subject on data. And the question is, what's the panelist's view of the data maturity in the continent, and how can we leverage our trade data, since data is a key infrastructure in the fourth industrial revolution? Anybody can take that. It's about data. Yeah. Anybody?
Any takers? Essentially asking the place of data in the implementation of the agreement.
Okay, I will take it, but I'm going to answer it somewhat from an investment perspective, if that's fine, for the personal question. So I think that is a very important point that the person has raised. It is a very huge concern, and that is because when you engage with Africans at different fora, the data, in fact, there is no uniformity. There's no coherence across the room on what the data figures are. I remember that a few months ago, we were having an engagement, an international engagement, and then data that was put together by UNCTAD was being used, and you had African countries coming up saying, no, that data, the data is not representative of, the statistics are not representative of what the realities are. But in reality, there is no one institution that is responsible for that data collation. So if like I said, to answer from an investment perspective, and the point I made about the Pan-African Trade and Investment Agency is that one of the things it wants to do from an investment perspective is to be the repository for investment information across the continent, so that it has credible, validated, verifiable data across the continent on all matters investment. That's one of the responsibilities it is going to have. So yes, it is a challenge on the continent. It's something being done. We have envisioned that responsibility to be handled by the Pan-African Trade and Investment Agency, which is yet to be operationalized. So yeah, that's what I can say from an investment perspective.
Thank you, Patience. There's one more question. I think it goes to Umar. People are really interested in mining and metals. Umar, this question is about mining. Umar spoke about the collaboration in building industries for processing metals. Given the processed materials may be traded with other regions, what will guide pricing for these finished products and return on investments to the participating countries?
Honestly, I think that's, I made mention of what we really need to do to be able to guide ourselves around this. What we really need is a metal exchange platform that through that we can sort of not dictate, but at least we can guide our prices as and not just in one country, but what's happening, cross border, right? And under the AfCFTA and how it's encouraging low tariffs or no tariffs at all. We can, even within the cross-border trade, the cost of production can be lowered. But essentially, I think what needs to happen is, a joint exchange platform through which we can all agree and manage the pricing of commodities, specifically the metals, which we happen to have abundance of. I think that's what really needs to happen. And that is what we are already on. We are creating a unified platform where the suppliers and the off-takers can somewhat meet, and we can start conversations around pricing and how we can sort of start creating our own, we can localize our own elements. The way there's a London Metal Exchange, there's a Shaolin Metal Market in China. We really need to have something like that in Africa that guide around the prices.
Thank you for your response. Most of the questions have been answered, and the Any unanswered questions will be circulated to all attendees, but just because you're important to us and your questions are going to guide us, one last question from David. How can the AfCFTA foster African registered companies in any African countries with ownership more than 50% to engage in infrastructure projects across the continent? I guess that Patience or Beatrice can answer that, or anybody else who's able to. Any takers?
I can attempt to answer that. I mean, under the services protocol, there's something called denial of benefits clause, which basically just tries. It's kind of like a sort of rules of origin for services. Basically, tries to ensure that it is actually those companies that have a real and substantial link to the economy that benefit from the preferential trade area. So that is actually embedded into the protocol, and the idea is to ensure that there aren't free riders just coming in, taking advantage of the free trade area, and then they don't really contribute in terms of jobs, in terms of development of the economy, etc. So that is already kind of envisaged within the protocol on trade and services, for instance.
Thank you, Beatrice.
Can I add, Patricia?
Sure, Patience.
Yeah, so under the protocol on investment, just like Beatrice had also pointed out, you would need to have substantial business activity in one African country and then invest in another African country. So basically, you must be an African investor. So a third-party investor just coming to invest in an African country will not benefit from the protections and the privileges that you get under the investment protocol. But you have to be Africanized. Let me use that term. You have to have substantial business activity in one African country and then invest in another African country in order to benefit.
Thank you, Patience. Let's keep the business here. Good. Okay, I'm handing this over to Mr. Shasore. Thank you for answering the questions, and thank you for all the questions that have been posed. Any unanswered questions will be circulated to all the attendees. Thank you so very much.
Yeah, and with those questions, we will also prepare a report of this town hall, as we have in the past, and we will forward that to the Secretariat, and we'll share it among the participants and other interested parties in order to make sure that there's a continuous engagement process towards the implementation of the agreement. But I don't know, is the back office able to give me any poll statistics, or should we share that after? If I don't see anything on the screen, I'll take it that we will share the poll statistics after. A number of interesting questions have come up about implementation, desirability, and effectiveness, and people's expectations as we move into many, many critical stages of the implementation of this, as I said, by area size, the largest free trade agreement area in the world. Unless I hear anything from the back office, we have promised to keep to time. We're 5 minutes ahead. I have a question, but I'm not sure the panel will be prepared for it. But Patricia, how do you feel? Well, how's Nairobi?
Nairobi is great, and it appreciates all the information that has come in today. We are more learned, we are more informed. Yeah.
And the Regional Economic Council issue. The whole, in West Africa, we're seeing a disintegration of ECOWAS, or at least a promised disintegration. People have asked me, even before the town hall, just asked me questions that, what does this mean for the RECs within the AfCFTA structure? Because people believe that the RECs are the bedrock, the foundation of the AfCFTA. And if you have three countries, three prominent countries leaving the ECOWAS regional economic community, what does that mean? Could you imagine that sort of thing in East Africa?
I wouldn't imagine such a thing because, I mean, the foundation of the AfCFTA, as I keep saying, is the RECs. Yeah. So for the AfCFTA to work, our RECs must stay together.
They must stay.
Yeah, it must stay. So I hope in Africa, in Kenya, we call them the wazee, like the wise older people, or, or the sages.
Yeah.
It is, since you spoke about dispute resolution, can make people stay. Yeah, I don't know how you're going to work around this. There's a clause, of course. I don't think the people who drafted it thought about it. Maybe it was a copy and paste of sorts. But yeah, it's now being tested. Let's see how it goes. But yeah, we hope ECOWAS stays together. It's important that.
Yeah, we need it because it has these complexities of Francophone and Anglophone. And see what I have.
Can I say some few things?
Prof, I trust you.
Yes, because I work with ECOWAS Commission, and when this matter came up that Sunday, when everybody was hearing this news, and the CNBC asked me, what is my comment? And I said, well, I'm in the airport by Monday morning. I'm going to make my reaction. And I made my reactions. You say, under the United Nations, self-determination is permitted. You cannot force anybody into actually belonging to economic integration. At the same time, there are procedures for entry and procedures for checking out. For ECOWAS, it's a whole 1 year to be able to get out. But again, there is room for negotiation. And therefore, to me, it is not a matter of moving out militantly. But let us see and address the issues which these people bring. These 3 countries, they are landlocked countries. And they face special problems in terms of transportation, in terms of other costs, and in terms of their complaint to coming from the activities of their previous colonial masters. So why don't we actually separate them and then listen to them seriously so that ECOWAS will look at the matter? And just 3 days later, ECOWAS reacted and said that they are still ready to negotiate. So it's not a closed matter. I think it's something that we can look into. Because as Patricia said, and you said it earlier, the success of African Continental Free Trade Area as put in the framework agreement is based on the issue of building blocks. So are they going to form another block that ought to be inserted in the African Continental Free Trade Area, or can they be allowed to operate alone? So I think these are the questions that ought to be answered.
Yeah.
And in ECOWAS, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Prof. We all realize the importance of the building blocks. And I think, well, it's a confluence between diplomacy and economics, and we hope they will resolve this soon so that it won't be any track down for West Africa. Instrumental that no other regional community has seen this. Well, it brings this, brings us to the end of today's session. Patricia, are you there?
Yeah, I think Dave wants to give us a president, maybe from the EU. I don't know.
Oh, brilliant. I love that. Oh, come on.
Oh, no, I just wanted to...
No, I love it. Come on, let's have that.
Just maybe leave on a hopefully positive note, which was, as everyone knows, in our EU family, we lost one of our largest members a couple of years ago, and we've survived. We've carried on, and we've prospered, and we are trying to establish new relationships. So even when the family maybe lose an important member, the show goes on, and all the great everybody involved can survive. So hopefully that'll give. So if it does happen, I think hopefully you guys will be able to get through.
Thank you for that happy note. That is a good outcome. But the EU is as strong as ever, despite the departures, and we expect that the AfCFTA will remain the same. It's just a shame that ECOWAS where you have jollof and football happens to be a place where 3 people are leaving at the same time. So yeah, it's brilliant. Thank you for that, Dave. It's good to end on that happy note. If there's anything else from any of our esteemed panelists, Beatrice, we've heard from David, Patience, Shegun, Umar. If there's nothing further, it's a brilliant time to bring to the end of one of our most successful town halls. This is the 7th, as I've said, but now we're going down into where the rubber hits the road and things are really becoming hotter. Africa trade is getting hotter. And if you know you're in trade and you're interested in trade, whether from the service or from the actual professional practice of trade, Africa is the place to be. And ALP provides a platform where both practitioners, policymakers, and private enterprise can come together once in a while to share views and disseminate that towards policymakers in order to continue to champion and shape the future of AfCFTA. Patricia, any views from Nairobi before I wrap this up?
Yeah, I think you summed it up very well. We'll continue knocking on doors. We'll continue preaching the gospel, private sector. And yes, we hope that we can be able to help the private sector to implement. Yeah, today we've learned a new song, implementation.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, we shall be in the noise. And yeah, we are grateful and most honored. Yeah, to the panelists and to the attendees. We've learned a lot. And yeah, we hope to keep talking.
Yeah. So our promise is that all attendees, all registrants, even though some people who registered didn't physically attend, and we take registrants very seriously, will get a communique, a repertoire of this conversation. But as Patricia said, we thank especially every one of our participants. We thank Professor Jonathan Aremu. We thank Beatrice Jata from the Secretariat. We thank Dave Anderson, BCLP, who I hope to see tomorrow. We thank Patricia, Patience Okala, a good friend of the firm. We thank Shegun Olutayo and Umar Adilodu. Thank you, the participants and all the audience. We thank the people in the back room who've made this happen so seamlessly. And we thank everybody who took interest on the periphery of this wonderful conversation. And to say that please look forward to the 8th Town Hall, which should be coming soon, with so many important developments outside the GTI and the developments relating to dispute settlement, protocol, and other things. But from the ALP practice group, which involves ALP East Africa, ALP NG Nigeria, and our multidisciplinary practices, and our trade practice called ALP Trade Africa. This is signing off and saying thank you and see you again soon. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you, Beatrice.
See you guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Jonathan.